Whether you are just beginning your knitting journey, or if you have been knitting for years and years, if you struggle with your cast-ons always being too tight, too loose, or just chronically inconsistent like mine used to be, sit back and get comfy and let me introduce you to crocheted cast-ons. Seriously, learning these techniques changed my knitting life forever. If you don't know how to crochet, watch this video anyway. Experience with crochet is helpful, but it is not necessary. I am going to show you the 3 primary crocheted cast-ons today: stretchy, not stretchy, and a provisional cast-on. And between them, you should be covered for a large percentage of your project needs. I am going to demonstrate all 3 for you in Continental first, so if you are an American style knitter, aka a thrower, feel free to skip forward to your section immediately. I'll list the time in the show notes if you can't find it readily using the timestamps in the timeline. Okay, let's dive in. If you want to play along at home today, you're going to want some yarn, appropriate size needles for that yarn, and you're going to want crochet hooks that are a size or 2 smaller, or several sizes smaller, than what you would normally use with the yarn that you're going to learn with. The reason why I love, well, one of the many reasons I love crocheted cast-on so much is that the way you use crochet hooks in this cast-on lets you get consistent sizing amongst your stitches, because with every single one of them, the hook that you are using becomes a spacer that you use to determine the size of the cast-on stitches, and you actually get a great deal of control that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this one aside because we only need 1 needle to cast on, and it doesn't matter if you're using circulars, straights, doesn't really matter. I just happen to be using this today because, well, frankly, I like the color. I like that it shows up. You want to start with a slip knot around your needle, and you want that slip knot to be able to travel a little bit. Now we're going to use, by the way, in this case, these are US 11s or 8mm hook or 8mm needles. Here I have a J or a 6mm, so a couple millimeters in diameter smaller, and this is an H or a 5mm hook, so a few sizes down from this. So there's our set. We're going to start with the non-stretchy crochet cast-on. We want our working yarn in the back. We want to take our crochet hook and we want to place it behind here to start. We're going to take our yarn and we're going to carry it all the way around the front, grab it with the hook, pull it down and through. Now we're going to pull up a big loop and we're going to park it up on the tip. See this big loop there we've just created? We're going to take our hook and we're going to place it down in the kind of hammock at the bottom we created. I'm going to snug down. Going forward, that's just how you get this one started. Now when you're counting your cast on, I don't generally count the slip knot. I don't like having that knot in the edge of my knit fabric. So when I go to work my first row of stitches, I just let this one drop and I pull that slip knot out. This is just how you keep things stable and connected while you get started. So here's 1 and 2 because we're not counting that one. Yarn over, drop a loop, park it up on the tip, insert the hook here, pull down tight, yarn over, pull up a loop, park it up on the tip, insert your hook as a spacer, and tighten the yarn down. Here's where the consistency and sizing comes out. Because this hook is in here, before we tighten our yarn down, our stitches are going to be consistent in size every single time because we're using a spacer every single time. Yarn over, pull up a loop, park it up on the tip, insert your hook, pull it down tight. I'm going to go through that real slow. Yarn over, draw up that loop, pull it up big enough that you can reach around and park it on the tip of the needle. Insert your hook there as your spacer. Pull your yarn down tight. Yarn over again. Drop a loop. Pull it up big enough you can put it up here on the tip of the needle. And put your hook through. And make sure when you put it through, make sure you're passing underneath both legs of that cast-on stitch you've just made. And then pull the yarn down tight. That's it. Now, there's a decent amount of space here, but it's not too much, which is really fantastic. You can actually control the spacing on your cast-on stitches and how loose or how tight this is by changing the size of the hook that you are using. So I'm actually going to gear down and use this one. Pull up a loop, park, put this smaller hook in there, and tighten down. I'm going to do a few with this size, and then we'll take a look at it. You can see where we transitioned from using the larger hook to using the smaller hook. You can see that these bumps here went from being this size down at this end. They're smaller and tighter, and the amount of distance that these stitches can spread at this end, it isn't quite so exaggerated. They're much more tightly spaced. They just can't come as far apart. Now this cast-on doesn't completely lack all stretch. There's a tiny bit, but it's very stable, and for projects where you don't want your edge to stretch, this one is a really great fit. Now there's one thing about these crocheted cast-ons that you want to keep in mind. Every single one of them, when you finish them, looks a little different. Let me pull this out here. When you go to park your last one there, well, second to last one really, your very last stitch of your cast on, you want to do something a little different. You want to yarn over, drop a loop, try and have it about the same size as the bottoms of these cast on stitches over here, and you're going to essentially do a chain one, but park that loop up on the tip of the needle. It changes the stability level of this last stitch. If you didn't do it that way, let me show you what that looks like. We just pull this out and park it up on there, and even if we put our hook in, tighten down, and then go from here, you see this strange angle that this sits at in relation to everything else? When I first started using crochet cast-ons, I didn't always do that, and the leading quarter on my fabric here, the beginning of my first row, it always looked really awful. It didn't look right. So you definitely want to make sure that your last cast-on stitch with crocheted cast-ons, you drop a loop, make sure it's not too big or too small, yarn over, drop a loop, and park that loop up on your tip. That's the terminal end. Now you see at the angle at which this final cast-on stitch is sitting on that needle is much more similar to everything else, and it's a much cleaner, nicer looking corner to your fabric when you do it this way. Okay, let's move on to the stretchy one. We are at our starting point again. We have our slip knot around our needle. You don't need a really long tail. And just remember, if you're going to pull out this one and pop that slip knot, the material that's in this becomes part of your tail. So you can have a fairly short little tail knowing it's going to get longer once you pop that. And it'll leave you with plenty of yarn to weave in. Yarn goes in the back. We're going to grab our hook here. Again, this is an 8mm, but this is a 6mm hook. You generally want to do crocheted cast-ons with a size or two smaller than the size of the needle you are working with in millimeter dimension. As with these not stretchy cast-on, we start here. I like to think of these two as, you're forming an X with the crochet hook in the back. Okay? Yarn's here in the back, and we wrap it around the front. Grab it with the mouth of the hook, pull it down and through. But now, instead of increasing the size of this loop and putting on the tip, instead, we're just taking our hook and we're rotating it to the back, just like that. Hold them both, the working yarn, all the way around to the front, grab it with the mouth of the hook, and pull it through that loop that's hiding underneath the needle. Rotate the hook to the back. Hold where they cross. Yarn all the way around to the front. Grab it with the mouth of the hook and pull it through. Of course, make sure that you're sizing your stitches here in the full diameter portion of the shaft of the hook, not here in the tapered section, not in the throat. Make sure you're doing it here, or it's going to end up being tighter than you want it to be and not have nearly as much stretch as you would like. Rotate that hook to the back. Wrap the yarn around the front. Down and through. Rotate to the back. I absolutely love this cast on. It is my absolute favorite when it is appropriate, when I want something stretchy. This is your edge. It's like the front face of a crochet chain. Isn't that gorgeous? I absolutely love that. I'm going to do a few more here. There's our edge. If you need to seam things together, this is fantastic to work with. But look at how much stretch there is. Look how consistent they are. This is that gorgeous edge, and the spacing on these is fantastic. You can control how much stretch you have in this cast on by adjusting the size of the hook that you are using. This is a 6mm going down to 5mm, going down to an H. I'm putting this in here, tightening down. Remember, the hook is in the back. They're crossed like an X, and the crochet hook's starting in the back. Yarn around to the front, grab it with the mouth of the hook, pull it through. Rotate to the back. Yarn around to the front, grab it with the mouth of the hook, pull it through. This is what's determining the size and the stretch and the spacing of these cast-on stitches. What spacer are you using? The smaller the hook you use in relation to the yarn and the needle, the tighter this cast-on and the less stretch it has. Last stitch, just like the not stretchy. We're going to, instead of bringing the yarn around to the front, we're going to just yarn over and pretend like we're doing a chain stitch. We're going to take that loop and we're going to park it up here to give us that nice stable corner. So now you can see here's where we were casting on with the 6mm, and here's where we geared down to a 5mm. They're smaller and tighter. These have quite a bit of stretch between them. This is really great for the edge of socks, by the way, for cuffs. Anything ribbed, this works really nicely. These, they can still be worked, but they are tighter, and there's not quite as much travel in the distance between the cast-on stitches using that smaller hook. But for the spacing, it is actually still decently stretchy. If you have a pattern that calls for casting on extra stitches in the middle of a row, crocheted cast-ons are really great. I have worked with quite a few patterns where they want you to do what's called the backwards E-loop cast-on to add on extra stitches somewhere in a pattern, whether you're doing something where you're increasing a row, maybe you're adding on extra stitches for sleeves, maybe you've bound off for one edge of a neck and you're casting back on for the other side. I have had substantially better success with how my finished garment looks if I have done either stretchy or not stretchy crocheted cast on instead of the typical backwards E-loop cast on. Now let's look at the provisional crochet cast on. Provisional cast-ons are interesting because they don't actually start with the needle. And if you're not familiar, provisional cast-ons are cast-ons that you start the cast-on with a piece of scrap yarn or some other yarn, generally in the same diameter, the same size and thickness, but generally contrasting color to the yarn you're going to be doing the project with. Provisional cast-ons, purpose of those is to let you have something that you can undo later and have live stitches that you can put back on a needle that you can then do something with, like graft them to another end. So we're going to start our crocheted provisional cast on by chaining a few. I definitely recommend you stay away from anything with a heavy halo, anything really fuzzy for provisional cast-ons, because it makes it harder to pull out later. I like a decent amount of chain for the beginning of my provisional cast-on. Now we're going to leave our hook in our working loop, and we're going to take our needle and we're going to lay it there in the junction between the two. So our crochet hook is here in the front, our working yarn is in the back. See, unlike the stretchy crochet cast on where the crochet hook is back here, it's here in the front. So it's an X, but this one's up here. You want to yarn over and pull straight down and through. Now, take your yarn in between the hook and the needle around to the back and do it again. Yarn over and pull it through. Yarn between the tip of the needle and the top of the hook, straight down and through. Essentially what you're doing here is you're making a crocheted chain, but you're doing so in such a way that the third loop from the back of the chain is greatly exaggerated in size and it's wrapped around the needle. These form the loops of your cast on that you will then use to knit your first regular row with the yarn intended for the finished project. Yarn to the back, yarn over, pull it straight down and through here in front of the hook. In between, yarn over, down and through. You do this for however many stitches the pattern tells you, and you complete a provisional cast on by chaining a few more stitches. And typically you snip this right here, and there's your provisional cast on stitches. You've got a chain on this end and a chain on this end. Now I'm going to work the first couple of rows with a different yarn, and I'll come back and show you what it's like to pull this out. I've done a few rows of fabric here. You would do whatever your pattern tells you to do, and then at some point it tells you, okay, it's time to pull out your provisional cast on, and it's time to get these stitches back on a needle so you can do something with them. You have two options here. You can either string something through these stitches before you pull this out, or you can catch your live stitches as they become available as you are pulling out the provisional cast on. If you're going to try and pick them up before you pull this out, then I highly recommend doing so with something that's a little smaller in diameter than your needle that you knit with, so you're not putting too much pull and stress on your stitches. Let me show you what it looks like to go through and pick those up. We're just going to go through and catch a leg of each stitch across the way, and then you can pull this out. That's one option. The other option is to very carefully, one at a time, pull this out. There's that one. Pull the next one. There's that one. Pull the next one. Capture that loop. Here's the next one. Capture that loop. If you had gone through and pre-strung with the needle, you just zip, and out it comes. Now you have live stitches at both ends of your fabric, ready to move on to the next phase of your project. For my fellow bi-stitchuals who learned crochet first, these cast-ons might have felt like a bit of a homecoming. But for those of you who struggled with them because that hook feels like a foreign object, consider watching this video and trying again a couple of times over the next week or so. You are working on building muscle memory and comfort with something that is drastically different from what you are used to doing. But the speed and consistency these cast-ons can bring to your knitting are, in my humble opinion, worth a little bit of ramp up and practice time. Really, if you're like most knitters, you already keep a few hooks around to pick up drop stitches and so forth anyway, so why not get some extra benefit from those tools? I hope you give one of these cast-ons a try the next time you are starting a project, and please let me know in the comments of this episode if you had a better experience with them than other cast-ons you may have tried in the past. And if there is another topic you'd like to see me make a video of, please let me know via the comments section, an Instagram message, or send me an email at the address listed in the show notes, because I'm here to help. And in the meantime, thanks for spending part of your day here with me at iHeartYarn. American style knitters, throwers, your turn. You want to use a nice smooth yarn to practice this, an appropriate size pair of needles to go with the yarn, and you want 1 or 2 crochet hooks to go with, generally smaller by a size or 2 or 3 than the diameter of the knitting needles you are using. These are US 11s. These are 8mm. This is a J or 6mm crochet hook, and here is an H or a 5mm hook. The reason crocheted cast-ons turn out so consistent is that you use the crochet hooks as spacers to determine the size and spacing of your cast-on stitches. As long as you do each one the same way across, they come out very, very consistently sized and spaced. And these make that so much easier to achieve than just freehanding it. To get started, we only need one needle. So I'm going to set this one aside. And you start with a slip knot around the needle. Please be patient with me. I am awkward as a thrower because by nature I'm a Continental. But we're going to use this larger hook for now. And you start the crocheted cast-ons, the not stretchy one, by crossing them. So you're forming an X, and the crochet hook is in the back. The stretchy and not stretchy start the exact same way. You grab the yarn, you carry it around to the front and hold it. You can hold it with those two fingers trapped there. You take the mouth of the hook and catch the yarn and you bring it through. Now, you pull that loop up big and you reach up here and you park it on the tip of the needle. Before you do anything else, take the hook and shove it in here. See, there's two big legs here. You want to make sure you pass behind both of them. Now, take the working yarn and tighten it down. Okay? Catch the yarn here. This motion, if you haven't done crochet, this motion is called yarning over in crochet. You're pulling a loop through, you're pulling it up big, and you're parking it up here on the tip. Put the yarn through, put the hook through, excuse me. Pull the yarn down tight. Because this hook is there as a spacer, you cannot make your cast-on stitches too tight. And as long as you pull the same level of tension on each of these, they're going to be almost identical in size all the way along. Trap with these two fingers. Do that yarn over motion to catch the yarn in the mouth of the hook. Pull it through. Pull a loop up big. Park it up here on the tip. Take the hook. Take our spacer, put it in here, pull down tight, yarn over, pull it through, nice big loop, park it up here on the tip, put in the hook as a spacer, and tighten the yarn down. I didn't actually pull that as tight as the others. You can generally tell if you're getting things about the same size because these loops that are happening down here underneath the shaft of the needle are all going to be about the same size. And you'll notice, let me take this out, they're the right size to be able to slide along. They're not too big, they're not sloppy, but they can still move. And that is so nice for your hands. Okay, got our yarn trapped here. We're going to drop a loop. We're going to park it on the tip, put the hook in as our spacer, and tighten it down. If you want tighter spacing on these, you can go down to the smaller hook instead. Yarn over. Pull up that loop, park it up there, put this in as a spacer, tighten the yarn down. Yarn over, pull a loop through, pull it up big, park it on the tip of the needle, hook as spacer, tighten down. Now you can see where we switched sizes of hooks, because with the exception of that one where I didn't pull down quite as much, the size of our loops here underneath our needle started to shrink in size. And the spacing in between our stitches at this end is a little tighter. So you get to control the spacing, the exact spacing of your cast-on stitches this way. Now, the very, very last cast-on stitch is different. Your last one, you yarn over and pull this through, but you don't pull it up big, you leave it small. See? Not much bigger than the diameter of the hook, a little bit. There's that little triangular space there. You yarn over again, draw a loop through that, and you park that loop up here and pull down. The reason you do that is you want this last cast-on stitch to be stable and strong, and you want it to sit at the same angle as the rest that you have made. If you didn't do it that way, if instead all you did was pull up this loop, park it on there, and pull down, even if you put this in there as a spacer so it wasn't too tight, look at that. It sits funny. It looks bigger than the rest. And before I knew to do it the other way, I actually had a couple of projects where this is how I started them out. This was my starting stitch to knit with, and the corner of my fabric here, there's no other way to put it, it was ugly. I was really, really unhappy with it. I don't want you to be unhappy with your project. So make sure your very last one, I was trying to revert, you have this loop down here. Instead of pulling it up big, it's down small. Yarn over, draw a loop through, and park that up here. Tighten down. See, now it sits at the same angle as all the others, and this corner in your fabric is going to look and feel nice. Okay, let's move on to the stretchy. I forgot to mention when I started that first section with the not stretchy cast on, I do not count the loop with the slip knot in it as part of my cast on. So I call that 0. The reason I call that 0 is that I don't like the feeling of that knot in the edge of my knit fabric. So if it says cast on 30, well, I'm going to cast on 30 here, not including this one. When I get to the end of my first regular knit row, I just let this drop and I pop that slip knot out, and then this hard little knot goes away. You don't need to leave an incredibly long tail, because when you pull this out, when you pop this slip knot, your tail is going to grow by all the material that's here in this knot and this loop. That leaves you with an even longer tail. So, don't waste yarn if you don't have to, and you can start with a short little tail. Now the stretchy crocheted cast on, yarn here in the back, slip knot that can move up and down, hook, here's our X, crochet hook in the back. You grab that yarn and you wrap it all the way around to the front, trap it between these two fingers, and pull down and through. So this is looking just like our not stretchy cast on, right? Well, here's how it's different. We didn't pull this loop up big, we left it small. We left it the same diameter as the shaft of our crochet hook. We rotate our hook to the back again. There's our X, and the yarn's back here behind both. We grab it, we wrap it all the way around to the front, trap it between those two fingers, use the mouth of the hook, pull it down and through. And make sure you size this loop. If you've never crocheted before, the millimeter measurement on hooks refers to this full diameter portion of the shaft. You don't want to size your stitches here in the tapered section called the throat. If you do, it's going to be way too tight, way too small, and you're not going to be able to be consistent in your sizing. So always make sure that you're sizing your hook here. Forming stitches here in the throat is sort of like working off your tips in knitting. It's going to be very hard to control, and you're always going to be too tight. Okay, reset. Rotate the hook to the back. Wrap that yarn around to the front. Grab the yarn with the mouth of the hook and pull it through. Small little amount. Rotate to the back. Wrap the yarn around the front of both. Pull this straight down and through. Rotate to the back. Rotate the yarn to the front. Pull it down and through. Size here. Rotate your hook to the back. Okay. Here's one of the reasons why Stretchy Crocheted Cast-On is one of my absolute favorites. This is your starting edge. Isn't that pretty? I just love that. And if you're going to seam things together, that's a joy. When I grab hold here, look at how far apart those things can go, but they don't look sloppy. They're very consistent. See, quite a bit of spread there. Not. This is a great cast-on for ribbing, for cuffs of socks, for the brims of hats, for cuffs of sweaters. I've used this a lot and I love it, love it, love it. I tend to end up being sad when I have a project that is not appropriate for me to use this to start. Now, if you want this look and you want this spacing, but you don't want quite as much stretch and give, gear down to yet a smaller hook. I'm going to do a number of stitches with the smaller one and show you what that looks like. Okay, and remember, just like with the not stretchy crochet cast-on, you want to make the last stitch of this cast-on stable and the same angle as all the rest. By this loop, you're going to just yarn over without bringing it around front. Pull a loop through, make it big, park it on the tip, and tighten it down. Not super tight. But now we have that nice stable starting corner, and our last cast on stitch is the same angle as the rest. But you can see where I switched hook sizes. Here's the bottom of the looser ones, the bigger ones, and you can see these are tighter. And the amount of distance you can get between these stitches at this end is not as great as the stretch available down at this end when you used a larger hook. So these crocheted cast-ons really do give you a tremendous amount of control over the exact amount of stretch, the exact amount of spacing. And if you are unsure about exactly what size hook you want to use for your cast-on and which one you want to use, if you are going to be swatching for your project, if it's something where fit matters and stretch matters, then use your swatch as an opportunity to test your cast-on. If you want to try and use a stretchy crochet cast-on, but you're worried that the hook you're going to be using is going to leave you with too much stretch or not enough, then you can do the beginning of your swatch with 2 different sizes of hooks and try your cast-ons, and that lets you have a trial run. Now let's cover provisional cast-on. For those of you who are not familiar, provisional cast-on uses a contrasting color scrap yarn that you do your initial cast-on with, but you do it in such a way that you can pull it out later, leaving the primary yarn you're doing the project with in a row of live stitches that you can pick up and do something with. You can, graft or add on, whatever you're going to do with it. You actually do not start the crocheted provisional cast on using a needle. You start with just a hook. You want to use a yarn for your provisional cast on that is approximately the same weight as what you're going to be doing the rest of the project with. And again, high contrast color. And please avoid things with a heavy halo. Please avoid extremely fuzzy yarns, because that's not going to go well for you. It's going to be hard to pick out later. Here is how you start the provisional cast on. You start with just a basic crochet chain. You start with a slip knot around the hook. You yarn over and you pull a loop through, and you make sure you size your stitch here around the shaft of the hook. Move those fingers up, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull a little extra through, and make sure you're sizing your stitches here. You want to make sure you can move the hook through it easily. Yarn over, drop a loop. For those of you not familiar, this is how to make a crocheted chain. Yarn over, draw that loop through, pull a little extra up, size your stitch here. One more. Pull up that loop, push forward, make sure the hook can move through it. We're going to leave this just as it is, but now we get our needle involved. We take our needle and we place it here in the junction between the yarn and the hook. See how it lays right there in that angle? You're going to leave the hook in the front this time. Our other crochet cast-ons, the hook was either in the back or you were bringing this around to the front. We're doing neither. You're just going to have the yarn trapped back here between these two fingers, so you can yarn over, catch the yarn with the mouth of the hook, and you're going to pull it down and through. Now the yarn is going to go between the tip of the needle and that hook, or back around to the back, so that you can do it again. Yarn over, pull it down and through, yarn to the back between the two tools, yarn over, down and through, yarn to the back, the hook stays in the front, yarn over, pull it through, yarn to the back. I'm going to finish this out and we'll come back and revisit. So let's say you have just cast on however many loops in your provisional cast on your pattern calls for. How do you finish this cast on? You're going to chain some more. You're not going to do this. You're going to take that hook to the back, yarn over, and just make some chain stitches like you did at the very beginning. And it doesn't have to be a lot, whatever you like. Normally what you would do is that you would pull this loop up kind of big and you'd cut this and pull this in through. That would leave these stitches here. Now for those of you who have crocheted before, you might notice that just like the stretchy crochet cast on, this edge looks like the front of a crocheted chain, a starting chain. What you're doing with this cast on is that the third loop from the center back of a crochet chain are exaggerated size loops, and that's what's wrapped around the needle for you to work with. These loops are where you anchor your first normal row of stitches in your knit project. I'm going to do that and then come back and show you how to take this out when it comes time. Okay, I've done a few rows of fabric here. You would do whatever your pattern tells you to do, and then at some point it tells you, okay, it's time to pull out your provisional cast on, and it's time to get these stitches back on a needle so you can do something with them. You have two options here. You can either string something through these stitches before you pull this out, or you can catch your live stitches as they become available as you are pulling out the provisional cast on. If you're going to try and pick them up before you pull this out, then I highly recommend doing so with something that's a little smaller in diameter than your needle that you knit with, so you're not putting too much pull and stress on your stitches. Let me show you what it looks like to go through and pick those up. We're just going to go through and catch a leg of each stitch across the way. And then you can pull this out. That's one option. The other option is to very carefully, one at a time, pull this out. There's that one. Pull the next one. There's that one. Pull the next one. Capture that loop. Here's the next one. Capture that loop. If you had gone through and pre-strung with the needle, you just zip, and out it comes. Now you have live stitches at both ends of your fabric, ready to move on to the next phase of your project. For my fellow bi-stitchuals who learned crochet first, these cast-ons might have felt like a bit of a homecoming. But for those of you who struggled with them because that hook feels like a foreign object, consider watching this video and trying again a couple of times over the next week or so. You are working on building muscle memory and comfort with something that is drastically different from what you are used to doing. But the speed and consistency these cast-ons can bring to your knitting are, in my humble opinion, worth a little bit of ramp up and practice time. Really, if you're like most knitters, you already keep a few hooks around to pick up drop stitches and so forth anyway, so why not get some extra benefit from those tools? I hope you give one of these cast-ons a try the next time you are starting a project, and please let me know in the comments of this episode if you had a better experience with them than other cast-ons you may have tried in the past. And if there is another topic you'd like to see me make a video of, please let me know via the comments section, an Instagram message, or send me an email at the address listed in the show notes, because I'm here to help. And in the meantime, thanks for spending part of your day here with me at